All right, what's up, everyone? Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Hoops with Noel. Got another round one talk discussion about some of the hot topics and some of the games that have been going on. But we can start off with this. And after 2-1 up in the series, the Mavericks are. Luka's been balling out. I mean, all the stuff with his first 9 games, and you see him statistically playing great, efficiency wise up there. And it's starting to make us beg the question, is Luka Doncic a top 5 player? And if not, what would he have to do to reach the top 5 of NBA players? But I'm going to pass this one to you first, Noel. Do you think Luka's top 5 now? And if not, what does he have to do to get there?
Yeah, so I think first of all, he's been, like you said, balling out this series. Definitely is worthy of consideration for a top 5 player in the NBA. In my list, I think he's right outside. I think he's a fringer, probably in the 6 to 8 range. In my list, if I had to just off the top of my head name 5 players that I'd put over him, I'd go Bron and AD off the lake. I'd go KD. I'd go Jokic, and I'll throw Harden in there too on the Nets. But I would say for him to really get in the top 5 definitively, I would honestly like to see some more on the defensive side of the ball. If I saw Luka just swatting guys in this series like Kawhi or PG or just guys who could really score the ball and be a two-way player, because I know he can rebound and he passes the ball too. If I saw the defense, then I would say he'd be a top 5 lock in my opinion. So I guess that's the differentiator, but regardless, he's a baller.
Before I go, I heard Anthony Davis on that list, and I feel like that's a little away from consensus, especially given the season, a guy like Steph had, and the seasons that a guy like Giannis, you didn't have Giannis there, right?
I didn't have Giannis.
And the seasons
Giannis
he's had. So
over Luka, but I didn't have Giannis on my list too.
So I'd just like to hear your reasoning with Anthony Davis before we move on, why you think he's better than these guys.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest rationale I give is more on the defensive side of the ball, which I said Luka was missing because I do think AD is one of the few players in the league who can guard anyone. And I guess some guards could give him the shake and bake, but more or less could hang with any type of player. And I also think he's the type of player who's skilled enough on the offensive side of the ball who can get almost any shot he wants, almost like a KD type who was also on my list. So that would be my rationale, but I do understand with injuries and longevity, there are definitely questions around AD being a top 5 player.
That's fair. And just to piggyback, even though I don't have AD on my list, if you're just looking at individual offense, defense, like total skill set, I feel like the thing that AD lacks is the playmaking, which is why he can't carry rosters the way a Luka Doncic does. But if you're looking just as an individual player, what his impact offensively and defensively, yeah, he's probably one of the 5 most complete players in basketball. It's probably him, Giannis. I think Joel Embiid might be near that conversation. KD would be in that conversation. So definitely that's fair. I'm going to go a little different from you. I do think Luka Doncic is a top 5 player in basketball because I'm going to go to that playmaking aspect and in terms of being able to carry a team, because I don't think Luka Doncic's team has a second star. I really don't. I mean, we're not going to talk a lot about Kristaps Porzingis, but he's been pretty terrible in this series. I know his shooting numbers aren't terrible, and he's had a couple of outings in terms of total volume of points where it's looked good. But there's 2 things that are really problematic for me with Kristaps Porzingis. One, when you isolate him on a smaller player, he's taking 20-footers, 18-footers. He's not able to create good shots for himself, which is something you talked about that Anthony Davis does really well. And 2, he's a liability on defense because the injuries have left him with poor lateral mobility. So he's been getting, like you said, shake and bake. It's been shake and bake barbecue chicken on Kristaps Porzingis all day in this series. And so because of that, and you see the load Luka Doncic is carrying, and he's the primary playmaker on that team, and he's an unbelievable playmaker. He doesn't really force anything offensively, but he has an incredible way of still being able to score the ball against any type of defense, against any defender. One of my biggest questions with him was shooting. And I think this year there's been stretches where he shot the ball as well as he possibly could. There's been months where he's a 41, 42% shooter from 3, but then there's also been months where he's a 32% shooter from 3. He's had 3 playoff games in a row of 5+ 3-pointers made. So you can't really argue that. And, the other guys in my top 5, there's like 7 or 8 top 5 players in the NBA. That's the reality. There's like so many, but it would be like Bron, KD, Nikola Jokic, James Harden. And, I like Steph's incredible. He definitely should be there. But right now, I'm going to go with the recency bias and not include Giannis, not include Steph, not include Kawhi, not include AD, and include Luka Doncic, because I think what he's doing at 22 in this playoffs in particular against whether it's Kawhi Leonard, whether it's Paul George, whether it's Rajon Rondo, whether it's Marcus Morris, guys who all have reputations of being good defenders in the NBA, and Luka Doncic is just giving them all buckets. So I'm going to say yes, he is a top 5 player in the NBA.
Interesting. All right, so I guess I'm a little bit with both of you guys. I'm kind of on the fence right now, and I have a contingency in place, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit. But I think the Mavericks can make the Western Conference Finals this year. I really do. I think if they escape the first round of the Clippers, this is probably their toughest matchup. I'm a little more bearish on the Jazz than maybe other one seeds in the past, like the Brown-led teams or, the Warriors of the past few years. And I think if the Mavericks did play a team like the Jazz, they could advance. So I will say this: if Luka can make the Western Conference Finals with this roster, he's a certified top 5 player. No ifs, ands, or buts, no questions about it. Certified top 5. Now, I value the playoffs a lot when ranking top 5 players. That's kind of why I don't have Giannis in there. Giannis has 2 MVPs. That's more MVPs than Kobe Bryant has. But in the playoffs, he hasn't escaped the second round. He's shown he can get stopped by the wall. And, yeah, go on, Vish.
He did make the one Eastern Conference Finals.
Oh, that is fair.
Obviously, he struggled against Toronto.
Yes, sorry about that. But, yeah, he has shown struggles a lot in the playoffs against, the more quality teams, and that's where I struggle to have him in there. So, for me, the playmaking is top 5, and I think also just based on his value, and if you removed him from this Mavericks team, they would probably be a bottom 8 or 9 team. I think if you removed, say, Anthony Davis from the Lakers, I still think they'd be really good. If you removed KD or Harden from the Nets, they'd still be really, really good. You could maybe even remove Giannis from the Bucks, and I still think they'd be a quality team. But if you removed Luka from this team, their offense, I do not know what it would look like. But it would not even be remotely close to what it is just because of the usage of Luka and how good he is. So I got him top 5.
Interesting. All right, so being the only guy who didn't have Luka in the top 5, what I will say that's certified in my book is if you change this question to top 5 offensive player, I think it's near undisputed that Luka would be in there. Because I value defense so much, that was the main reason he didn't make it on mine. But I do like the contingency by the man Blake with if Luka leads his team to the Western Conference Finals this year and puts up a fight in there, I would maybe have to reevaluate some stuff. And he could very well be in my top 5.
So I think the defensive argument is fair when you're comparing him to the Anthony Davises and the Kevin Durants and even Giannis, who's an unbelievable defender. But here's my thing with the defense. I think that with the defense, one, when he first came into the NBA, he was bad on defense. I think he's no longer bad. I think he's okay. I think he's a better matchup for less explosive, bigger players because he's got a big body and he's really strong and he can bump them off and hold them off and contest shots and get rebounds. But I think the one thing he is he's pretty savvy and he gets himself into nice spots in terms of passing lanes or like we've seen a couple times in this series where he straight up just locks out Kawhi Leonard in the post. And usually Kawhi Leonard, if he gets to the post, he's getting the ball and he's going to be able to take the shot he wants. Luka does a great job of fronting him and basically preventing the entry pass, which not a lot of players in the NBA can do, but that's really impressive. So I do want to counter that defensive point where while I agree with you to an extent, I feel like when you're talking top 5, I think it's good enough, especially when we talk about guys like James Harden, who is in all 3 of our top 5. And James Harden's obviously not his defense. In 2014, he had a couple plays where he fell asleep and he was disinterested playing defense. And since then, he has a reputation that just doesn't hold true because he's actually not a bad defender. Same thing with Steph. Steph isn't the greatest defender in the world, but he's certainly turned himself into something a little around average and a bit more than average at times. It just depends on whether he's reaching in too much or not. But if Luka Doncic is right there and you say the offensive ability is top 5, which I agree with, I know Blake agrees with, Then for me, when you look at what he's doing in this playoffs and you just look at what he's doing at 22, it's hard for me to say no, like you're not a top 5 player. But again, it just goes back to the reality of the situation is that there's 8 or 9 top 5 players in the game. And none of us mentioned Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid is unbelievable. He should be a top 5 player in any other NBA. He's a top 5 player, but there's now top 5 is like top 10 because there's so many good players in today's NBA.
Mm-hmm. And I did want to touch on what you said earlier, Vish, and his 3-point shooting. And that was kind of one of his biggest issues, my biggest issues, and other people's biggest issues with him was that, his step back 3, and it looks awesome on highlights and stuff, but it isn't always the best shot. And he used to at least, miss it a lot more than he would actually make it. But I feel like maybe it's just, he just hates the Clippers and just loves just splashing threes on their face. But in the regular season too, even towards the end, his 3-point shooting was much improved. And I really think that if he's hitting threes like this, like over 40%, I don't know what his offensive weakness is besides the fact that he can't shoot free throws for whatever reason, because he draws fouls at an unbelievable rate. It's almost annoying watching some of the fouls he draws, but he's great at drawing fouls. And then just his touch in general is honestly unreal. I'd put it up there with almost anyone else, and just in the lane and even from the 3-point line now in mid-range. And then also his passing, like if he gets doubled, he knows exactly where he's going before the double's even there, and it's always in the pocket. Like you very rarely see an errant pass from him where it's just, man, I don't know what more playmaking he can do for this team, because they don't really have anyone else besides like maybe Jalen Brunson that playmakes for others, and he's the backup point guard. So that's kind of my, I guess, final statement for Luka. Do you guys have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have a question for Noel, because he talked about the defense, and you just brought up the free throw shooting, which is something we haven't talked about. Is that a reason you kept him out of the top 5? I mean, obviously, we've talked about how phenomenal he is, and I think we all agree, no matter what, he's one of the best players in the NBA, and his future is limitless. But the free throw shooting in particular is worrisome when he's the primary ball handler of a team that's closing games. You want your primary point guard or big guard or whatever Luka Doncic you want to classify him position-wise to be an 85+% free throw shooter, because it's very easy to close games if you can just get yourself to the free throw line, make 2 free throws. It slows the game. You can slow the game down, and those are 2 free shots, free 2 points. So is that a reason why you kept him off? Because I noticed the rest of your top 5. It was, I mean, KD's not, obviously LeBron's like 73%. That's not his strength, but KD's 90% or near there. Jokic is like 88%. James Harden's like 87%, 86%. Anthony Davis is like an 85% free throw shooter. At least he was last year. So is that a reason you kept him out?
I would say it goes into the reasoning, but it wasn't the biggest. I'd still say the defense was kind of the biggest. But I do agree with a lot of your counters and points on that, because he does stand in the spots very well, as in like posting up players who can historically get to their spots, like Kawhi Leonard in this series or other players. It's just more and a lot of it is there's picks going there, but in terms of lateral quickness, a lot of times you can kind of get around Luka. I would say a little bit easier as opposed to other elite 2-way stars in the league. So it was more of that, in my opinion. One thing I will add while we're still on this topic, it is top 5, I would say, of any top 5 player in the league, they have composure similar to that of Luka, whereas he's only 22, but in these big moments, he'll talk trash to other players. He'll stand up for himself. And when he's on the bench, he just looks dialed into me. I don't see too many emotional outbreaks from Luka. Sometimes there's a call or 2 that'll get him stirred up, but for his age, I think he's just very mature, and he's already got that top 5 player composure, in my opinion.
Fair enough. So bottom line, Nolan says no. Vish says yes. I have a contingency, so I kind of cheated, but I think it'll be yes by the end of the season to whether Luka Doncic is a top 5 player or not. Recently, we had a video saying the Clippers shouldn't be worried about him. We were all wrong. We were all entirely wrong. We'll be the first to say it. We did not think his shooting could be as good as it has been, but he's been making Zubac look like barbecue chicken out there. So really not much more to say. He's been putting him in a blender, putting everyone in the blender. So yeah, Luka Doncic, top 5. Drop in the comments what you guys think. But Next topic is a little different. So I don't think you'll see the mainstream media talk about these two guys. They'll probably talk about Ja, but they won't talk about the other guy. But these are the two, I'd say, the people who performed the best in the playoffs for the Memphis Grizzlies, and that's Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks. And I think most of us believe this, but they're the most underrated duo in these playoffs as of right now that just people aren't talking about, that are putting up really good numbers and, leading a team that maybe was kind of written off before the start or before the play-in games, but is now performing. They're doing well. They're tied 1-1 currently against the Jazz. But Noel, thoughts on Ja Morant and the Dillon Brooks duo?
Yeah, so very interesting, honestly, because I think a lot of people who haven't been watching the playoffs or the recent NBA games think of the Grizzlies as almost just Ja Morant doing acrobatic, crazy stuff, getting on highlight reels, and then a bunch of other kind of guys who shoot threes, maybe are good, like Jonah Valanciunas, good in the boards or whatnot. But the people who have been watching this series, there's also another guy who's maybe not as acrobatic, but getting buckets and on some good defenders too, and basically wherever he wants to. I think in the last game, his stat line was something like 10 for 12. It was pretty ridiculous in terms of percentage-wise. And that man is Dillon Brooks. And one thing about Dillon Brooks that is awesome, and I'm sure you guys will touch on, is just the heart and the intensity he plays with, because he goes hard every second, and he's certified bucket. So I would say that the mainstream media probably won't talk about this. They'll probably only show you Ja Morant acrobatic plays. But there's another guy here. That's Dillon Brooks, and this duo is legit, is what I got to say.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, you touched on a lot of really important things, like how well Dillon Brooks has been shooting the ball in these playoffs, how well both these guys compete. I do want to point out one thing, and Noel, I know you'll love it because you're kind of the biggest person I've ever met when it comes to talking basketball. You're like the biggest stickler on it. Both these guys are two-way players, and I know that you're big on that because you basically all the players you like, they got to play defense first. And both of these guys are very, very good defenders, especially for a young age, at their young age. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, right? Ja Morant had a 40 ball in the playoffs against the 1 seed as the 8th seed on the road in Utah, a hostile environment. That's special stuff, especially with his parents being, whatever happened with that. That was messed up. Like, that shouldn't be happening. His parents should be allowed to enjoy their son playing basketball. And Dillon Brooks, his defense on Steph Curry in the play-in game was well documented. Even though Steph put like 37 on him, that was probably the toughest 37 Steph's had to put up in a long, long time. So, like, you can talk about all of those things. To me, there's one thing that stood out to me that's made Ja Morant so special. And obviously, like, Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, incredible duo, but I just wanted to single out Ja Morant in particular. So I think what happens to a lot of young point guards, especially in the first playoff series, is because, one, it's slower pace, more half court, and defenses are more prepared on how they want to play them. They turn the ball over a lot. Ja Morant has played 79 minutes in this series against the number one defense statistically in the NBA, in the Utah Jazz. He's turned the ball over 5 times. That's unbelievable. That tells you how poised he's playing. That tells you how smart he's playing. That tells you how good his decision-making. Just in comparison, Luka Doncic, prior to tonight's game, had also played 79 minutes in 2 games. He had turned the ball over 10 times against the Clippers. And we know how special Luka is. I mean, almost all of us think he's a top 6-7 player in the NBA. I think he's top 5. So it just tells you how special Ja Morant has been in terms of his composure and what he's been doing and how smart he's been playing. And yes, absolutely, this duo is unbelievable. I think they're going to be a trio once Jaren Jackson gets fully healthy. And the Memphis Grizzlies play hard. They play defense. They play smart basketball. And Ja Morant is as tough as they come. I think they could be very, very good for years down the road.
So, Vish, there's one thing I do disagree with what you said. And you said the trio would include Jaren Jackson, but we're forgetting someone formerly known as Slow-Mo, Kyle Anderson. Pretty disappointed you left him off that list.
Yeah, I would agree. A little bit.
No, my bad.
But to move on from that and talk about Morant and Brooks, so obviously, everyone loves Ja Morant. I think unless your team has gotten 40-pieced by him, you will love him. But yeah, obviously, like, insane finishing and what he did against the Grizzlies, like you said, this is his first playoffs, and he dropped 47 against Spida Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Royce O'Neal, and all the other, guards and members of the Jazz that have contributed to that number one defense. And that's just special right there. I'm impressed that his 3-point shooting has been pretty decently improved in the playoffs. I know he doesn't really take a lot of threes and he doesn't make a lot of threes, but he's done a better job at that. And I think you highlighted it well, Vish, with the turnovers only being 5. It seems like when he does get doubled, then that's a decent amount because he is the primary playmaker. He knows exactly where he's going with the ball, and he can drop some dimes. His passing is really, really underrated, and I think that's kind of something that, you won't see the highlights of. You'll see the highlights of him making a sweet dunk or, jumping with above 40-inch vertical, but his passing is super underrated and very skillful. And then Dillon Brooks, I wasn't the biggest fan of this guy. The first few times I saw him, I thought he was a little out of control, and there is still moments of where, he'll just try to charge through the lane like he's Russell Westbrook and just take over and turn the ball over, and that's kind of an issue, but he makes some very tough shots, like one of the best tough shot makers, and he is really strong. And then his defense, you mentioned his defense on Steph. His defense on Steph was phenomenal, and he kind of is one of those guys who has a chip on his shoulder, and, he's always barking at other players, and I do love that. It kind of brings back just the, I guess, more older version of basketball where players were always barking at each other and, you weren't accidentally hitting someone and a foul was called every time. And I don't know, sounded like an old hat here, but I do like when players are chirping others, and Dillon Brooks does that. So shout outs to both of them. And they've both performed very well for having very little experience. And that is something that you don't always see, especially as an 8th seed going against the 1 seed. They've performed great, and in the playing games, they were very resilient in, obviously beating the Spurs and playing well against the Warriors as well.
I got a question for you guys. I know there's a little bit of recency bias to this, but we're talking about 2 players. I'm going to bring up 2 players that have been all-stars in the league, one this year, one last year. Who are you taking moving forward? Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, or Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson?
Spicy question right there. That is spicy.
I would take Brandon Ingram and Zion probably.
Yeah, I would too. I think the success dispute between the teams would have to do more with the supporting casts.
And the coach.
Yeah, and the coach. Yeah. I think the Grizzlies are superior in both contexts. But yeah, I'm siding with Zion and B.I. But I do think it's very interesting because of the similarities in age, with both being pretty young players in the league.
So I'm actually going to take Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks, and here's why. I think Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram are the more talented duo. I think they're both the better duo in terms of better individual players. I think Zion Williamson is the best player of these 4, even though Ja Morant obviously has been unbelievable in these playoffs. Like Zion Williamson was averaging like 25 on 60% this year. Here's the reason why, though. I think they complement each other way better than Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. One of my biggest takeaways from this season, other than obviously Stan Van Gundy still remains the horrible coach that he was on my Pistons, and he's still that coach for the Pelicans, is that I don't think Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram work for each other. I think Brandon Ingram needs to go to a place where he can be the solo star and he can take up shots. And he needs to take 22 shots a game. And some are going to be really bad shots, but he needs to take those shots. And Zion Williamson, obviously, they featured him more towards the end of the season, but there shouldn't be games where Zion Williamson is shooting 10 for 12. Zion Williamson should be shooting 25 shots every single game. And you got to put the ball in his hands every single possession. And that kind of eliminates what Brandon Ingram can do, because Brandon Ingram is not a great spot-up shooter. He's not a great off-ball mover. And so I think Ja and Dillon Brooks gel with each other better because they can both guard, but you can rest Ja a little bit and put Dillon Brooks on that point guard and have Ja take the shooting guard, and they complement each other in the sense that Dillon Brooks is a very good catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. He's a very good off-ball player, and he can also handle the ball and give Ja rest that way. And Ja, obviously, Blake, you touched on it, he's shooting the ball, even though percentage-wise in these playoffs, he's not blowing anybody away. The confidence that he's shooting these open threes with is unbelievable. I mean, they basically played 2007 LeBron defense against him in the play-in tournament, where it was like Greg Popovich, like, drop off of him. make him shoot. Let's see if he can make it. And Ja Morant stepped into those 3-pointers and kept drilling them one by one. I think he made 5 in the game, which is a very, very good number. Even though they were open, you still got to make them. They were daring him to shoot, and he said, yeah, keep daring me. I'm going to keep knocking them down. So because of that, like, obviously this, like, recency bias would definitely say Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks. They're in the playoffs. They're dogs. They're all of this. But just because of the way they complement each other and the fact that I don't think you need to split them up for both of them to be the best versions of themselves, I'm going to go with Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would say it comes down to, what you said with individual talent versus a duo in itself, because I do agree with the points that Ja and Dillon Brooks complement each other's style of play a lot better than Zion and Brandon Ingram, even though maybe individually Zion and Brandon Ingram could be better in themselves. So I would say it comes down to that. Very interesting. And regardless, though, people who haven't really been paying attention to Dillon Brooks and Ja should in this series because it's a duo. That's what I would say.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't have much more to add, but that is an interesting thought. Obviously Ja and Zion get compared a lot because, one was pick 1, one was pick 2. So those comparisons will always be there, but no one, I guess, I've never heard the comparison of Brandon Ingram and Dillon Brooks. I think that's probably the first time any human being has ever thought of that comparison. So thank you for bringing that up, Vish. Because it was actually it was funny, but it was a good comparison. But yeah, so I guess bottom line here, Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks, you need to more than just watch their ESPN highlights of only Ja, because this is a very underrated duo for the Memphis Grizzlies. Going to the Garden, New York, the Mecca, the New York Knicks, the Bulls, half the old 2011 Bulls team, but the 2020-2021 New York Knicks, they're playing the Atlanta Hawks right now, currently down 1-2, and their main star, the most improved player in the NBA, who is usually their primary playmaker, has been kind of struggling drastically. Game 1, shot 6 of 23. Game 2, 5 of 16. Game 3, 2 of 15. And he's averaging, I guess, a little over 3 assists a game. He's had 4 assists twice and then 2 assists. So not the best performance from their most improved player, their star. So I guess this begs the question, should Derrick Rose take over duties as the primary playmaker for the Knicks? He has played really well this postseason. Some have said vintage. He doesn't like that term because it's not exactly vintage, but he has kind of turned back the clock to his old ways and being a dominant force in the NBA. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this. Noel, do you think Derrick Rose should slide into that primary playmaker role for the Knicks?
So personally, I do. I think D Rose would be good in the role. I think other people could also fill the role when he's not in. But my biggest reason is just Julius Randle has been the primary playmaker of this New York team. He has been struggling more than any other player in the playoffs so far. And I would, as the Knicks, I would try to give him a spark, help him out to just get some confidence back, get some buckets. And the best way I can think of to do that is not have him bring the ball up every single possession or most, and maybe get some off-ball movement, feed him in better situations, because he's a pretty good post player, but posting up from taking the ball up as a point guard is pretty tough, regardless of who your matchup is. But outside of that, I think I would say Derrick Rose, because I think he's been arguably the player of this series. I think he's got the momentum's on his hands. He's playing composed. Nothing's really shaking him. And although there might be better point guards in terms of passing ability, I do think right now, because of how he's been playing and how Randall's been playing, this would be a good move.
So I don't know if he should be made the primary playmaker, but I do think there should be more of a 50-50 split on who initiates their offense. Right now, there's just too much on Julius Randle, and the Hawks are kind of exposing Julius Randle. They're exposing his inability to shoot, and they're exposing just the fact that because he's not a true point guard and because they can scheme up a defense for him, they're exposing his inability to be able to consistently create his own shot and make jump shots. Like, a lot of times we see Julius Randle trying to bully people, and he's not moving anywhere, and he gets stuck, about 8 feet away from the basket, and he's trying to spin, and he's spinning into nothing. And obviously the shooting numbers are woeful, but he's not taking shots that he can consistently make. So of course they're going to be woeful. I mean, taking 9-foot turnaround jumpers and like weird floaters and running wild shots in the lane and step back contested 3-pointers and stuff like that. Julius Randle is not going to make shots like that. So I do agree with that. My big thing with Rose is just the fact that I don't think he can consistently get other people involved within their offense. Like, I've seen a lot of Derrick Rose in my life. Obviously, we're all from Chicago, so we watched the best of Derrick Rose. But then I'm a Pistons fan, so I watched a lot of Derrick Rose the last couple of years. And the thing with Derrick Rose is he's turned himself into this incredible mid-range jump shooter, and he's really savvy with his handle in terms of being able to create space and get his own shot, which is what we're seeing in this series, because it's not like the Hawks just have these incredible individual defenders. It's just that Derrick Rose is the only real player on the Knicks that can get his own shot and make it. And so my only problem is that I don't think Derrick Rose can consistently make plays for other players in terms of getting the offense, moving. It's more than just assisting the ball, making the right pass to get the ball moving and, swing it on to Reggie Bullock for an open three and stuff like that. So I think it should be a 50-50 split, especially because Randle has done such a good job in terms of initiating their offense all year. I think that obviously they need to help him and get going in terms of his scoring, because nobody else on this team can score besides Rose, and he struggled, but they still need his playmaking and his ability to initiate their offense.
So I'm kind of more with Nolan on this one, but I have a few things that weren't brought up that relate to the Hawks. So obviously Randall struggled, but I think the Hawks' wing defenders are actually pretty solid. Bogdanovich, Daniil Hunter is just locked down. Collins, and then obviously Clint Capella, say what you want about him on offense, but on defense, he's pretty solid. He was giving the Mutombo finger wag tonight. Gotta love that. And yeah, so like for Randall, going against those guys, probably harder for him to score is like, I'd say those guys match up pretty decently with him, just size-wise. And then also like the wing guys have a good ability to actually keep up with him and stuff and not be overpowered, which not all teams have like a 3 or 4 different guys that can actually do that on a roster. So kudos to them for that. And then also, who is the Hawks point guard and how is his defense? Well, from what I've been told, Trae Young is maybe the worst defensive point guard in the whole league. So if I'm the Hawks, I'm going high screen and roll with Derrick Rose, and I'm giving him a chance to make a play. Because here's why.
Mark Jackson loves that offense.
Yeah, he does. I mean, they have Taj Gibson, one of the best pick and roll bigs. I don't know if that's true, but they have bigs, and they can send them in the pick and roll, or even just have Derrick Rose ISO at the top. I don't care. Just get Trae Young in space and make him work on defense. He's obviously carrying the load on offense. He's really the only real playmaker on their offense, so that's already a big stress for him. But maybe exhausting him on defense wouldn't be a terrible idea either. And having, putting him in a situation where he's having to defend a lot of one-on-one and, almost draining his energy because, it's not easy, going on the perimeter and just locking down someone like Derrick Rose, who is shifty, who has a great handle. And I think the best criticism that you brought up was the passing. And definitely there's times where it's not what you would like compared to other point guards like the Lukas or the Hardens or even the Trae Youngs, where they know who's open and when they are open just based on, getting past the first guy. But I still think in a vacuum, Rose is good enough to the point where he's not just completely missing obliviously wide open people time after time. And it'll still be better than what Randall can do, because we've seen what Randall's been doing, and quite frankly, it's not good at all. It's incredibly inefficient. And Derrick Rose has had more assists than him, even without being the main guy. So I think that kind of goes to show that he's been just as good of a passer, and he maybe even needs to take on more of a burden. Now, he has shot a lot, so clearly he's had the ball in his hands, but I'd say more Derrick Rose and get those 2011 Bulls team back together. I mean, Thibodeau's been playing Rose 38 minutes a game. He's got, he's been prepping him up just like the old times. So I'd say more Derrick Rose.
Okay, so Noel, before you go real quick, one thing I did want to add is you're right about the Hawks defense. I feel like I diminished that a little bit. Yeah, like DeAndre Hunter is a beast. Bogdanovich is scrappy. Clint Capella has been a really, really good defensive player all year. All of those things are true. But I think the one thing is that, and we've seen in the modern NBA, is that if you have multiple guys who can handle the ball and create their own shot, they're going to be able to get their own shot no matter how many good individual perimeter defenders you have. And I think that's the biggest problem with the Knicks. They don't have other people. Like RJ Barrett was a 3rd pick in the draft. RJ Barrett has really struggled in this series in terms of being able to create space off the dribble and get his own shot. And he's also consistently struggled making shots. His lack of a shot, I think, has been exposed a little bit. Even though the numbers aren't terrible, I feel like visually it's just something you can't rely on just by the eye test. So I think that, obviously you're right. The Hawks do have a good defense, and they do have good individual defensive players. I just think it's more about the Knicks' inability to create and make shots than it is the Hawks' defense.
Yeah, what I would say is there was a point that Blake made in the spiel that I thought was just hitting the hammer on the head, is that regardless of who's taking the ball up, there is a player on the Hawks, who Blake mentioned, who is arguably the worst defensive player in the NBA. So if you have a struggling offense and you have the worst defensive player in the NBA on the other team, personally, I just put those 2 and 2, and I go after that player. And regardless of the players, the one strength of the Knicks is that they're so deep in the sense they have a lot of different guys who can get to the hoop, who can get points. So whoever Trae Young is matching up against, I don't know exactly the exacts of who he's been matching up mostly, but get that person going, especially if your best player, Julius Randle's not playing too well. But when it comes down to it, I do think that Derrick Rose should, whether it be majority or 50-50, should take the ball up a little bit more and give Julius Randle a chance to make plays without being the primary ball handler.
And maybe that's Emmanuel Quickly too, who's another guard on their team. Now, he hasn't been getting the same minutes as those other guys, but he's someone who's a rookie who performed pretty well. And, maybe he's another guy that you say, just attack Trae Young, try to draw a foul, hit your floater or whatever, and do it that way. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I think Derrick Rose has obviously been a part of the plan. He took 21 shots in game 3, which is a significant amount, but keep putting the ball in his hands and letting him play make, because clearly what he's been working on over the past few years that hasn't been shown in Detroit, that's now being shown and reunited with Tibbs is, it's something that needs to be put on notice.
Burks is another guy. I think Burks had 27 or 28 in game 1 of this series. He's really savvy. He can get to spots. He needs to play better for them. I think that overall, I mean, they're not a team with a primary playmaker, which is why I keep saying I'm hesitant to just say put the ball in Rose's hand. They're a team of where, you have Randall, who makes the plays. You have Rose, who makes a few plays for you on offense. You have Alec Burks. Usually RJ Barrett, I feel like he was really bad today, so maybe that's really what's sticking in my mind. But he can make some plays for your offense quickly, and it's just a variety of different guys, as Noel said, that can get to the hoop off the bounce. And the big problem is they haven't been able to make shots from outside, which has not enabled them to get to the hoop. So we'll see. I still can't just wrap around that Rose should just be their primary playmaker. I think they need to continue to do what they're doing. They just maybe need to maybe get Randall going off the ball early and then put him on the ball.
That I can agree with. I think they need to get Randall involved somehow. Maybe it's not as the primary guy, but maybe putting him in pick and rolls or, getting him sets to get in more open shot or easier opportunities. But yeah, him not showing anything after winning Most Improved is kind of a letdown to the whole state of New York, to be honest with you guys. So it's slightly disappointing, but hopefully he'll figure it out in these following games, and we'll see what they can do against the Hawks. I know they're down currently 1-2, but they still got a fighting chance. But any more thoughts?
All it for me. It's all I got.
It's all she wrote for me too.
Yeah. All right. I'm the same. So, all right. Thank you guys for watching. Much appreciated. We'll post these clips individually so you can interact with the team's fans and hear why, Luka's definitely top 5 or definitely not top 5. Why John Morant and Dillon Brooks are scrubs, or why they're already better than LeBron and A Disney or AD. Some people call me Disney. I'm just saying. But thank you guys for watching, and we'll be back next time.